Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video we're going to change a car's outer tie rod end. Now the first thing we're going to do is just get some tools together. First thing we're going to need is a socket set. Next on the list is a hammer. If you have them, some vernier calipers. Next on the list, CRC penetrating oil, and lastly a tie rod end separator. Now changing an outer tie rod end is a fairly straightforward process. These are basically all the tools we're going to need. The only other things we will need are spanners, axle stands and a jack. Okay, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is remove the front wheel. We can go ahead and loosen off the wheel nuts and then put the front of the car up onto axle stands. Okay, with the wheel removed we can see what's behind here. This is the outer tie rod end here that we're going to be replacing, and the reason why I'm replacing it, it's got a slight tear in the boot there, so it's just leaking a bit of its grease. Now before starting I'm just going to soak this thread here with CRC, and I'm just going to give it a bit of a wipe. The next step is we're just going to take a spanner and we're going to undo this locking nut here. Now you can just loosen that nut just using a hammer and tapping onto the spanner. Now the next step is just undoing the nut from the outer tie rod end where it mounts into the hub carrier. Right, we're going to take a look at our replacement tie rod end. Now what we're going to do is just compare this to the one that's already on the car, and to do that we're just going to take a rough measurement of this outer tie rod end, basically from the middle of this outer cap here to the end of the tie rod. Okay, so that's roughly 76 millimeters. Now I'm just going to compare it to the older tie rod end that's on the car. We can conclude that the length of this tie rod end is the same as the new one. Now that we've confirmed that this new tie rod end here matches the size of the old one that's on the car, what we can do is replicate the alignment setting of the old tie rod end and apply it to this new one when we fit it to the car. Now just a side note, I will be taking the car in for an alignment after this job's done. Now before we remove the outer tie rod end here, what I want to do is just take a measurement between the end of this outer tie rod and the end of this thread on the inner tie rod. Now I'm just going to mark a spot on the inner tie rod, and then I'm just going to take my measure from the thread at that spot and the edge of the outer tie rod. Now it's time to take our tie rod end separator and just remove this tie rod end. Now that we've removed the outer tie rod end from the hub carrier here, we're going to remove this outer tie rod end from this inner. Now to do that we just need to wind this off, and what we're going to do is count each full rotation as we're winding it off. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 17, 18, 19. Now the outer tie rod end came with grease, so I'm just going to apply that onto the thread. Now we'll reattach the outer tie rod end and count as we fit it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Now I'll just double check with the verniers. Okay, and just double checking with the vernier calipers, that's exactly 33 millimeters there. Now the next step is just taking this locking nut and we're just going to wind that up against the outer tie rod end, and then we'll take a spanner and tighten it up. Now that the locking nut has been tightened up, it's time to refit the outer tie rod end into the hub carrier. Now looking at the workshop manual, the tie rod end nut needs to be tightened up to 22 foot-pound. Once that nut has been torqued up, we can just insert the split pin. Well, that brings us to an end of another video. We've successfully changed the tie rod end in this car. Hopefully you've learned something by watching this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.